Минулого тижня ми ознайомили вас з Тетяною Гайдук та Поліною Бойчук, ведучими передачі «KIEV, not KIEV» з Києва. Сьогодні покажемо їхнє інтерв'ю з послом Канади в Україні Ларисою Галадзою.
Where can the Ukrainians and foreigners meet the ambassador of Canada in Kyiv?
Oh, I can't answer that question.
Canada needs friends with those interests, and Ukraine is a very important one.
Canada is closer than you may think. Hello world, it's Kyiv, not Kyiv on the line. My name is Polina Bochuk and this is my friend and fellow Tatiana Haiduk. Today I'm wearing the Canadian flag colors and there is a very good reason for that. Yeah, we are very pleased and we are very honored to present to you Her Excellency Ambassador of Canada to Ukraine, Miss Larisa Galadza. You're welcome. Madam Ambassador, both pleasure and honor to have you here in our cozy studio of Kyiv, not Kyiv. Big pleasure.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. I think we're going to have some fun today.
Oh yeah, let's do this. Let's do this. When Ukrainians think of the most Ukraine-friendly nations, Canada comes to mind first, because Canada was the first Western country to recognize Ukraine's independence, and there are a lot of things that make Canada a true ally to Ukraine. It's an open-minded government. It's a huge weight in the international arena. It's a big level of economic growth. All of this makes Canada way too important for Ukraine. What makes Ukraine important ally of Canada?
Great question, thank you. Let me take this answer on a few levels. First, let's step back and let's look at our interests, because we have common interests, not just bilateral interests, but we are both democratic countries of about the same size. We are both countries that live next to very large world powers, and in Ukraine's case, Russia and the European Union. We have economies that rely on trade, and we are big supporters of the multilateral system. Countries like ours, we rely on that multilateral system, on the rules-based international order. Organizations like the World Trade Organization or the United Nations, to level the playing field so that we can compete as middle-sized countries against the very big ones. And so together we have an interest in the world, in those institutions that level the playing field. So Canada needs friends with those interests, and Ukraine is a very important one. Let me also answer the question from a values perspective, and I'm going to take this from Canada's perspective. You know, Ukrainians first started immigrating to Canada in the late 1800s, and immediately upon arriving in Canada, they integrated themselves into the decision-making structures. They became politicians, members of parliament. They became senators. We've had 2 governor-generals with Ukrainian roots. They became provincial premiers, mayors of big towns, researchers, leads in academic institutions. They rose to the level where they were shaping what Canada was. And so, from a values perspective, we feel ourselves very close to Ukraine, not because of who Ukrainians are today, but because of the Ukrainians that came to Canada and that worked hard to shape what Canada is today. So there is a natural affinity, there is a natural coincidence of values that exists, and so it makes Ukraine an easy ally as well. Finally, I would say that from a political, an economic, and a security perspective, bilaterally, Ukraine is an important ally for Canada. There's a lot that is happening here in Ukraine that Canadians can learn from. I'll give you an example. The Canadian Armed Forces, we have a 200-person training mission here. They're here because we have an interest in Ukraine's security and territorial integrity, and we want that restored as soon as possible. And so they do tactical training for the units that are going to go and fight on the front. But those units are also having an experience that Canadian soldiers don't have, and we're learning from that experience. Ukraine is on the front lines of a hybrid war, and we know that that hybrid war easily reaches across the Atlantic and around the world, but here we can learn so much about it. So that's another example of how Ukraine is a very important ally for Canada.
Canada indeed strongly supports Ukraine's territorial integrity, and you, Madam Ambassador, have led the direction of peacekeeping operations and stabilization in the MFA of Canada, if I'm not mistaken. And your appointment, I think, is a kind of manifestation of big Canada's attention to Ukraine, which is really, really great. But does it also mean that Canada is ready to go deeper into the peace process in Ukraine using your personal experience?
I like to think that I bring my personal experience to that job and to understanding the conflict dynamics, to understanding what makes a strong peace process, and to understanding just how long and deep a process that is. Ukraine has itself gone more deep and broad and more open about its peace process, much more active in the last little while, and Canada here, like other diplomatic missions, is here to accompany Ukraine on that journey. And we'll bring what we can to it. From my previous job, a couple of things come to mind. First is the knowledge that women need to be more involved. More women are involved in peace processes, whether they're the formal peace processes or the informal ones, the stronger the outcome is going to be.
We will probably come back to the gender question a bit later, but as for the peaceful negotiations and as for the peaceful talks, would you personally like to break into those peaceful negotiations and participate in them more actively? And do you think that the political will and the expertise, as they say, are enough for these peaceful negotiations to be successful?
Political will and expertise are really important. They're really, really, really important, but they're not enough. There's a third element that's required, and that is political legitimacy. And so a country negotiating its peace process must know that its population is behind it. If you don't have political legitimacy, you don't have sustainable peace. You may be able to end the war, but you won't be able to sustain the peace. So how do you get that political legitimacy? You get it through dialogue, you get it through real engagement, not just telling people what you're going to do, telling people what you're taking into negotiations, but talking to them about it, explaining it, but also hearing what their perspectives might be. All of that enriches a peace process, along with the expertise. Unfortunately, there are a lot of experts in the world on how to negotiate peace, because there's a lot of peace that needs to be negotiated. Political will is very difficult to keep up, but those three things together are a very powerful force, and that generation of credibility and legitimacy is something that through our programs at the embassy we're able to support, and we do support organizations that want dialogue, organizations that want to help counter disinformation, creating platforms, translating books, what have you, little things that we can do to help generate that political legitimacy, help the Ukrainian authorities set the stage for not just the end of the war, but a sustainable peace.
Pandemics changed a lot the world we live in, the way we travel. Many countries introduced some restrictions and introduced rules in which they opened their borders to foreigners. But let's hope that all the restrictions are temporary and soon we'll go back to normal. And let's remember that one of the issues in the bilateral agenda was the introduction of visa liberalization regime. So where are we now? What criteria should Ukraine meet to get into the visa-free list for Canada?
We love it when people come to visit Canada, and especially when Ukrainians want to come and visit Canada. You know, in 2019, let's use those numbers because 2020 numbers don't count. 2019, 22.1 million visitors came to Canada, and there were 341 new immigrants to the country. And we're delighted with the immigrants, we're delighted with the interest in visiting Canada. But what's really important is that all of those visitors and immigrants come respecting the laws and the policies for people coming into Canada. And there are many ways that you can come to Canada. You want to work, you want to study, you want to do business, you want to invest, you want to visit your family, you want to come look after your grandchildren for a while. There's all different ways that you can come. And so our interest is in making sure it's as easy as possible for Ukrainians to come to Canada using the right vehicle, using the right route, using the right kind of permission. And so there are many things that we can do, I think, and this year we're going to get more deeply into these questions. We'll segment the population a little bit. Students. What can we do to make it easier for students to come to Canada? What can we do to make it easier for youth to move back and forth, including for Canadian youth to come here and work? What can we do for business travelers? What can we do for people who want to come to Canada on an internship? So we need to look at these things and at these different kinds of travelers, different kinds of interest in coming to Canada, and make sure it's as easy as possible for people to understand what the requirements are, how to apply, what the rules are when they're in Canada, and how to make sure that those rules are respected. So I think that that's a cooperation that we're going to have to make it easier for Ukrainians. I'm really excited about the Youth Mobility Agreement. This isn't just a piece of paper that says, hey, Ukrainian government and Canadian government want youth to go back and forth, because youth do go back and forth. This is much more significant than that. It allows, a Youth Mobility Agreement will allow Ukrainian young people to go to Canada for a year, find a job once they're there, travel, maybe they want to ski in Whistler and work at a restaurant, or they want to live in downtown Toronto and serve coffee. They can go and they can do that. Likewise, Canadians can come here, and I think this is going to be a prime destination spot for Canadians under the Youth Mobility Agreement. But the laws aren't in place yet to allow that in Ukraine. And so we need to work with members of the Verkhovna Rada, with the ministers responsible, with the government, with other authorities, to see how we can make that happen so that it can be successful for both Ukrainian and Canadian youth.
Sure. Canadians can have a great gap year here in Ukraine, I'm sure about.
Fabulous gap year, absolutely. I've met some who are here who are doing just that. I've met some who came here for a little while, loved it, felt so comfortable that they have stayed longer. And it's not just Canadians who have a Ukrainian heritage. It's Canadians have no Ukrainian blood at all, but feel comfortable, probably for a lot of the reasons I talked about earlier. They feel comfortable, that they feel that there are opportunities and possibilities here that they don't necessarily have at home, and so they're going to live a chunk of their young life here. It's important that they do it legally.
Sure. For the last 10 years, have you spotted the tendency, is the number of Ukrainians who would love to move to Canada from Ukraine is increasing?
Well, I don't know if the number that would love to move to Canada is increasing, but I can tell you what the statistics are for immigrants, and they have gone up. From in 2015, it was about 2,500 immigrants, permanent residents were from Ukraine, and more recently, it's up over 3,000. So it has gone up by about, I don't know, 20–25%, and we'll see what happens in the future. But there are, there are strong pulls to Canada, and Ukrainians are very good immigrants to Canada, as over a century of immigration has proven to us.
Madam Ambassador, do you buy Ukrainian stuff?
Yes. Yes.
What goods you buy here you would like your friends in Canada would be able to buy?
I think that Ukraine has a fabulous fashion industry. I think the footwear, the jewelry, the clothing, these are the things that I go out and buy. I buy art as well, and textiles, pillows, cushions, blankets. So my family and friends are very familiar with all of this because that's what comes home for Christmas, for the gifts. Yes, food is excellent. We already buy a lot of Ukrainian apple juice. Yeah, there's many things.
So since the 1st of August in 2017, the FTA, the Free Trade Agreement between Ukraine and Canada is in force. But right now, one of the main questions between the two countries is the FTA revision and modernization. So where does this attempt to revise and modernize the FTA stem from? Hasn't the agreement live up to the expectations?
I would say the agreement has absolutely lived up to expectations. The point of a free trade agreement is to diversify our access to a market and to have preferential access to markets. And that's what this agreement has done between Ukraine and Canada. The other point of an agreement is to make sure that everyone benefits, that the benefits of a free trade agreement are spread out in our societies. From the day, right in 2017, as soon as this agreement was signed, Ukraine's exports to Canada increased by 70%. Over the course of the 2-3 years that the agreement has been in place, Canada's non-coal exports to Ukraine have increased by 28%. So this agreement has worked really well. In fact, it's worked better than most free trade agreements. We're happy with it. But the agreement had written into it a clause that said after 2 years, we should look at it again and see what more is needed. And there were things that weren't included in the first KUFTA, we call it, the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. In particular, trade in services. And this is going to be a big part of these discussions going forward, is telecommunications, financial services, IT services, and I think that there are a lot of common interests, and not just in trade, but also in collaboration and the innovation that these sectors in Canada and Ukraine can do together.
Right now, do you spot a lot of Canadian goods in Ukraine, here in Ukraine?
I spot some obvious ones. The other day, driving down the road, I saw a whole load of Bombardier 4x4 vehicles. I see in this cold weather that Canada Goose parkas are prominently displayed in store windows. And of course, every grocery store has maple syrup in it. So yes, I'm reminded of Canadian products often.
Great. And don't forget about shrimps and hake.
Oh, and shrimps and hake. Thank you very much. That's right. 70% of Ukraine's imports of frozen cold water shrimp are from Canada. Canadian shrimp.
Because that's an
Canadian
interesting
fish.
Canada is closer than you may think.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah, it is.
It's in your freezer section of your grocery store.
Do you always feel comfortable in meetings with the Ukrainian government officials when they assure you that all the reforms are fine, they're going in the right direction with the right pace, and deeply inside you know that that's not always so?